Welcome to Cold Case Story. Today we are going to start this story with a special explainer that dives into one of the most chilling and honestly, truly baffling mysteries in modern history. We're going way back in time to the 18th of August, 1966. Our setting, Morro do Vintém. Now, if you're not familiar, this is a steep, incredibly dense, heavily forested hillside. It looms directly above the city of Niterói in Brazil. From up there, you look right across the beautiful, sparkling waters of Guanabara Bay, straight toward Rio de Janeiro. It's a gorgeous spot. And from the outside, this day seemed completely ordinary. The afternoon was thick with that heavy tropical heat, the sky was perfectly clear, and the bustling city down below was just humming with its usual summer rhythm. But hidden high up in the dense, tangled tropical vegetation of that hillside, a scene was waiting to be discovered. A scene that would completely and utterly defy logic, science, and the very limits of our understanding. This, my friends, is the lead mask's case. It's a mystery so profoundly strange, so deeply unsettling, that even decades later, it continues to haunt investigators, amateur sleuths, and honestly, anyone who hears about it. So let's get into it.
We enter this narrative right in the middle of a hot, golden afternoon. Picture this. A young boy from the local neighborhood was up on the steep, grassy slopes of Morro do Vintém, just simply flying a kite. That's it. Just a kid enjoying a summer day. But as his kite caught the wind and dipped toward the tree line, he glanced down toward a small patch of grass, hidden away among the really dense, unforgiving brush. What he saw absolutely made his blood run cold. Lying perfectly still, side by side in the tall grass, were two grown men. The boy, obviously terrified, ran straight down the hill for help, and the local police were quickly called to the hilltop. Now, imagine being those cops. As the authorities pushed their way through the thick tropical foliage, sweating in the heat, and finally approached this hidden clearing, they found themselves staring at a scene that made absolutely zero sense. Both of the men were dead. But you see, it wasn't just the fact that they had died out there in the middle of nowhere. It was the incredibly bizarre, almost theatrical manner in which they were found. It was like something out of a surrealist painting.
I want you to notice the sheer, jarring contrast here between the completely mundane and the absolutely surreal. It's wild. On one hand, you had these everyday items. Both men were dressed in identical, pristine formal suits. Think about that for a second. Formal suits. That is hardly the attire you would choose for a strenuous, sweaty hike up a steep, muddy jungle path, right? Lying carefully on the ground between them was a simple, empty water bottle. Beside one of the men lay a small, totally ordinary notebook. If you just looked at those items, everything seemed so perfectly normal, so quiet. But then, you look at their faces. Covering the upper half of each man's face, resting heavily and directly over their eyes, were handmade masks fashioned entirely out of lead. And I'm not talking about some sophisticated factory-made props here. No, these were crude, heavy, jagged pieces of metal shaped into rough, makeshift blindfolds. They were clearly cut and hammered by someone who had limited resources, but who also had a very specific, incredibly deliberate intent. You literally have two men in sharp formal suits, lying dead in the brush, wearing heavy metal blindfolds. It's just staggering.
Now, to even begin making sense of this deeply unsettling scene, we really have to look at who these men actually were. Because they weren't unknowns, they were identified within hours as Manoel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana. Both were in their 30s. They hailed from the nearby town of Campos dos Goytacazes, which was a bit of a trek away, and they worked together as electronics technicians. This is a crucial detail. These were guys who were highly respected in their community. They were known for having practical, technical, analytical minds. They were not reckless. They weren't known for pulling stunts or being prone to dangerous, irrational behavior. They were stable. They had families who loved them and who were waiting for them to come home. These were men of science, men of repair. They literally dealt in circuits, radios, and strict logic every single day of their lives. And honestly, that is exactly what makes their presence on this remote hillside, wearing crude pieces of lead over their eyes, so utterly incomprehensible. Why would two logical, grounded family men do something so seemingly insane?
Tracing their final day reveals a picture of methodical, calculated calm. There was no chaos here. On the morning of their deaths, Manoel and Miguel took a bus together from Campos down to Niterói. In the early afternoon, they stopped at a local bar near the station. And this is where it gets interesting. There, they purchased a bottle of water and two matching raincoats. Keep in mind, they bought these deliberately as a pair, even though the weather was perfectly clear. The bar worker who served them was interviewed by police later on, and he gave a chilling little detail. He said the men were completely calm, entirely sober, and highly purposeful.
However, he noticed they were nervously checking their watches over and over again. It was as if they were tightly bound to a very strict, non-negotiable schedule. They had somewhere to be. By late afternoon, as dusk was just beginning to fall, they left the bar and began their difficult ascent up the steep, forested slope of Morro de Vintém. Every single step they took was deliberate. They weren't wandering aimlessly. They were clearly, undeniably preparing for an expected, scheduled event.
So when the bodies were finally brought down from that hill, investigators were absolutely desperate for answers. I mean, they were assuming they'd find something obvious, right? But the autopsy results only deepened the mystery to a terrifying degree. The pathologist worked methodically through the examination, but he found absolutely nothing. And I mean nothing. There were zero signs of violence. There were no indications whatsoever of a struggle or a fight. Neither body had any visible wounds, scratches, or blunt force trauma. Internally, their organs were in perfectly normal, healthy condition. But here is the most baffling part of all. The toxicology reports showed absolutely no identifiable toxic ingestion or poisoning. Nothing in their blood, nothing in their stomachs. Now look, it's true that 1966 Brazilian forensic technology definitely had its limitations. They couldn't test for every obscure chemical out there. But the stark, terrifying medical fact remained. These were two healthy men in the prime of their lives who had simply stopped living. Their biological systems seemingly shut down simultaneously side by side, leaving not a single trace of forensic evidence behind to explain why.
With the bodies offering no clues, the only real piece of evidence left behind was that small, ordinary notebook found resting in the grass beside them. Inside, written in Portuguese, was a single, terrifyingly cryptic note. I want you to listen to these exact words very carefully. 1630, be at the agreed place. 1830, swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals, await signal mask. Let that sink in for a second. It reads exactly like a cold, calculated instruction manual. It describes a precise procedure, a sequence of highly specific, unusual actions, all tied strictly to the time on their watches. They were instructed to be at the place. They were instructed to swallow something. They were instructed to put on the masks. But the ultimate purpose of this dark, bizarre ritual was completely absent from the pages. Who wrote these instructions? Were they dictating this to themselves, or were they following orders from someone else? The notebook offered up the what and the when, but it completely withheld the why.
And that note opens up a staggering amount of missing evidence surrounding this case. The note says, swallow capsules. Okay, what capsules? Police went back and scoured every single inch of that hillside. They combed through the tall grass. They dug through the dirt and the brush. No capsules were ever found. Not a single one. There were no empty casings, no discarded medical containers, no chemical residue left anywhere at the scene. Then the note says, after effect. What effect were they anticipating? Were they expecting some sort of physical transformation, a visionary state, a trance? And then await signal. What signal? And from whom? Or maybe more importantly, from where? The two men clearly followed the instructions to the letter. They were exactly at the agreed place, and they had the metal masks securely in their possession, resting on their faces. But whatever it was they swallowed, and whatever cosmic or worldly signal they were waiting for in the dark, it left absolutely no physical evidence behind. Except, of course, their lifeless bodies.
To actually understand the why behind all of this, investigators had to dig really deep into the secret lives of Manoel and Miguel. And what they uncovered was fascinating. It turns out that both men were deeply, deeply involved in a specific 1960s Brazilian spiritualist culture. Now, this wasn't just some casual weekend hobby for them. This was a sincere, highly dedicated belief system that heavily overlapped with early UFO contact culture. Within this very active community, practitioners engaged in intense, complex ritual preparations. They truly believed in traveling to highly specific, energetically charged geographical sites. They believed in waiting for designated signals, and they held a genuine, unwavering expectation of making actual contact with non-human intelligences. This context is absolutely vital for our explainer today, because it completely frames their actions. This wasn't a sudden descent into madness or some random chaotic suicide pact. This was a devoted, methodical preparation for a spiritual or extraterrestrial encounter that these two logical technicians believed was absolutely 100% real. With that spiritualist context in mind, suddenly the surreal elements of the crime scene begin to take on a strange, chilling kind of logic. Think about those lead masks. They weren't arbitrary objects of torture or random junk. They were functional tools within their specific belief system. They were very likely crafted to protect the men's eyes from an intense, blinding light. Perhaps they expected massive radiation or an immense burst of energy that they genuinely thought would emit from the contact event they were waiting for. This fundamentally shifts the entire narrative. We are no longer looking at an inexplicable act of insanity. We are looking at the quiet, absolute commitment of two men who literally sat at a home workbench, carefully cutting and shaping sheet metal with simple hand tools, deeply preparing for a profound cosmic event. They bought raincoats to protect their suits from the elements and lead masks to protect their eyes from the unknown. They believed in their mission so much and were so committed to this contact that they literally bet their lives on it.
But here's the cold, hard truth. Belief alone doesn't stop a human heart. So what actually killed them? Since the autopsy failed to give a definitive answer, investigators and researchers over the years have proposed three main scientific theories. First up is the capsule theory. It is highly possible that the men ingested a home-prepared volatile chemical compound based on some esoteric literature they were reading, intending to induce a visionary trance. Because of the limitations of forensics back then, this unknown substance may have triggered an undetected, fatal cardiac arrhythmia. Their hearts just gave out. Second, we have to look at the location itself. The hilltop of Morro do Vintém actually has a documented history of unusual atmospheric electrical activity. Is it possible they were struck by a freak, lethal electromagnetic anomaly that stopped their hearts instantly without leaving external burn marks? And third, this specific hill has been eerily associated with other unexplained deaths over the years. Later researchers documented strange electromagnetic characteristics native to the site. Did Manoel and Miguel unknowingly walk into an invisible, deadly environmental trap?
Despite all the wild theories, all the scientific testing, and all the intense interrogations of their spiritualist friends, the authorities eventually hit a massive brick wall. The Brazilian police had absolutely no choice but to take the case file and officially stamp it with a single, incredibly frustrating word: undetermined. It couldn't be definitively proven as an accident, it couldn't be ruled a homicide because there was no evidence of foul play, and the in-depth psychological profiles and heartbreaking family testimonies completely ruled out a double suicide. These men were planning for the future, so the active investigation just slowly ceased, simply because there was not a single physical thread left to pull. And you really have to think about the human cost here. For the families sitting around their kitchen tables back in Campos, staring at two empty chairs, it meant dealing with a quiet, suffocating, endless grief. They lost their loved ones, men who had gone up to that hill fully expecting to come back home, and they were handed absolutely zero answers in return.
Fast forward to today, and the crude lead masks that gave this dark, fascinating case its name are still preserved. They sit under glass in a dusty police evidence archive in Niterói. They just rest there in the clinical fluorescent light, rough and impossibly heavy, serving as a silent, eerie testimony to that fateful August night in 1966. The men who made them died side by side on a hillside that just happens to overlook one of the most breathtakingly beautiful views in the entire world. If you stand where they fell, you have a clear, sweeping sightline right across Guanabara Bay, straight to the towering, iconic statue of Christ the Redeemer. Whatever immense, otherworldly thing Manoel and Miguel were so desperately seeking when they climbed into the humid jungle that evening, they met their end with that spectacular earthly view right in front of them. And those heavy metal masks they left behind? They are the absolute only tangible proof we have that they were preparing for something incredible. Whatever their ultimate purpose truly was, whatever signal they were waiting for, it died with them in the tall grass. The eerie, incredibly precise notebook remains, the dark, atmospheric, electrically charged hillside remains, and of course, the heavy lead masks remain. But the central burning question of this entire case remains completely and utterly unanswered. We have two men, we have two lead masks, and we have absolutely zero answers. So, I have to ask you, what do you think happened on the steep, dense slopes of Morro do Vintém in August of 1966? Was this just a tragic, accidental poisoning from a ritual gone completely wrong? Was it a freak, localized natural phenomenon that stopped their hearts? Or did they actually encounter something out there in the dark that the human body simply wasn't equipped to survive? Take a moment to analyze the timeline and all the bizarre evidence we've unpacked in this explainer. I really want to hear your thoughts, so please share your own theories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe for more unexplained mysteries.